Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 6. Ooh, we are over halfway through this book. How exciting. It's a mid-sized chapter today, so not as horrendously long as the first two and last three chapters, but not as short as Chapter 7, which, when you guys read that, ooh, what a treat you're in for there. So let's get to it. As always, only follow the pink highlighting. Any other colour is from a previous student, as well as these notes here. So feel free to take them if you want, if you would like. But I find them a bit too vague. So let's be precise. This is linking back to what happened in Chapter 4, the death of Sir Danvers Carew, that MP, and the death was resented as a public injury. Now, this is a metaphor because no one has actually incurred an injury, like, I don't know, a big old bruise. But this metaphor suggests that, you know, Sir Danvers, who is this symbol of the very upright Victorian gentleman, because he's got all this status and money, but he's also has to be respectable because, you know, he's an MP. So respectable gentleman deeply affect people. I'm going to say culture, because it's quite hyperbolic in the sense that him dying, this one bloke, and everyone deems it as, oh, I am personally injured by this. I am personally hurt. So people hurt by the fact he is killed. It's really setting in how deeply this idea of that respectable gentleman runs and how important it is to the people as well. Then we go down a bit. This is talking about Hyde, the man's cruelty at once so callous and violent of his vile life, strange associates of the hatred that seemed to have surrounded his career. So words like vile, cruelty, callous, violent, hatred. There is, I'm going to have to pop this down there. Let's call it a semantic field. And then if we had to group all of those words under one umbrella term, I would say semantic field of villainy. Just being a villain. And then on top of that, as you can see, I've sort of sectioned off this and I've tried to circle the semicolons here and here. But this block as a whole, it's very, very long. It almost seems like listing with those use of semicolons. But there is just a extremely long phrasing. The evil of Hyde is overwhelming. There is so many negative things to say about them that even the phrasing, you know, you almost run out of breath if you're just trying to read that in one big old go. It's overwhelming, it's over the top. He can't quite get over it. I want to go back up to the interesting use of word here, of the hatred that seems to have surrounded his career. Now, what they perhaps really mean by saying this is life, his life. But it's almost this idea that Hyde sees, you know, being bad as a kind of job. Hyde, let's say Hyde's evil equals job for him. Like he makes it his sole purpose in life. From the time he had left the house in Soho on the morning of the murder, he was simply blotted out. And if you blot something out, it is the only things you blot out, like you get a piece of paper and it's like with ink, and it's because you've made a mistake. So by that comparison, Hyde equals a mistake. You know, this, or a stain, you can blot out a stain. Like on society, Hyde is like this stain, this mistake, and he just needs, you know, blotting out. I've got to say, this is also a metaphor, because it's figurative. Going down again. Now that evil influence had been withdrawn, a new life began for Dr. Jekyll. that's just important to highlight in terms of us getting another clue about, these men are clearly linked in some way. And then Jekyll is described as a familiar guest and entertainer. So this is all describing Jekyll down here. And as we can see, it deeply contrasts the negative language used to describe Hyde, and now we get very positive language. He had been known for charities, okay, so he is generous, benevolent. You could just say kind, but benevolent just sounds better. He was now no less distinguished for religion. In other words, not only was he now well known for doing charity work, but also of being very religious. This contrasts with some of the language we saw in the previous chapter that we annotated, all these hints that Jekyll wasn't completely religious. So faith in God equals drives out Hyde and evil. So is this almost idea that, Hyde is kind of like the Antichrist, as it were, and Jekyll, when he's being himself, he can fully devote himself to God again, because Hyde is out of the way. On the next page, in the open air. Now, remember, Hyde was all about concealment. If he's in the open air, Jekyll can be seen. So this is the opposite of Hyde and concealment. Hyde does everything in night time. Jekyll does everything in the day. He did good. His face seemed to open and brighten. So inner change equals physical change. What context does that link to? The physiognomy. That your outside reflects your inside, but what Stevenson is perhaps suggesting that your outside will only change once your inside does. He then, Jekyll hosts a lovely party. Lanyon had been there, oh my gosh. So Lanyon and Jekyll, who had fallen out, are friends again. That's important. It shows how much Jekyll has changed. But then all of a sudden on the 12th and the 14th, the door was shut against the lawyer Utterson. So Jekyll goes from being this party boy in a good way and inviting everyone around, being super friendly, and now the door is shut against anyone that tries to visit him. And having been used to, for the last 2 months, to see his friend almost daily, he found this return of solitude to weigh upon his spirits. In other words, Utterson is deeply saddened by Jekyll's absence. And then he visits Dr. Lanyon to see what's going on, and Lanyon had a death warrant written legibly upon his face. The rosy man had grown pale, his flesh had fallen away, he was visibly balder and older, physical decay, all of that. I'm getting my annotations from the lovely quotation bank book. So we are graphically shown the transformation of Lanyon and the physical deterioration of his person when he, as we know later on, this is when he's discovered Jekyll's secret and he sees Jekyll turn into Hyde. Rosy has associations with vibrant colour, it's natural, it's healthy, whereas pale has deathly connotations. You are only pale if you are sick. And of course, therefore, rosy and pale is also a juxtaposition which shows the extent of his change and how drastic that change is. We've also got some lovely alliteration in flesh had fallen. And with that kind of fricative f sound, but in this sense, it's actually quite a fluid sound. The flesh had fallen, and it underlines the fact that Lanyon's flesh is literally slipping off his bones. Fluid sound, flesh, slips off. A bit like Jekyll when Jekyll turns into Hyde. So with all of this, the physical transformation mimics Jekyll Hyde, and the transformation that's been taking place there. So we almost see these little clues, this foreshadowing here. We could put foreshadowing because we haven't seen it happen in the book yet. Anything else? Oh yeah, the death warrant. This is a metaphor because a death warrant is a literal thing where it's a legal document ordering for an execution, and it just foreshadows the death of Lanyon, really, and how certain this is. Once a warrant is written, you can't really undo it. Foreshadows Lanyon death. And let's just draw a line to show that they are separate annotations. I'll just hover it over there. Feel free to pause it here if you need to get any of that down. And now I'm going to move it over. He also has a look in his eye that shows the deep-seated terror of the mind. It was unlikely that the doctor should fear death. That's just something to just sort of underline there. It's not super important, but it's clear that he is afraid of death here, and yet as a doctor there is no other profession where you are so well acquainted with death and the causes of death, so this is quite shocking that he now fears his state. And then, what was the cause of this? This is very, very interesting. Like, if I had to choose just one quote, I would actually just choose this. "I have had a shock," he said, "and I shall never recover." Now, let's say that happened today. How would you guys react? I know how I would react. I would say, what utter pish-posh. We don't hear of it today, do we? No one dies of shock anymore. Or maybe they do, but it doesn't happen very often. In this time period, the only people who, in classic literature, who would die of just having a shock are women, weak women, those kind of women in those kinds of books. And this is a man, and an intelligent man, and a previously very, very healthy man, and he dies of a shock. That tells us how bad this shock must have been. So we're linking in some context here. Dying of shock equals stereotypical, because it is a stereotype. It's not necessarily true. Trait of weak women in, let's say, 18th to 19th century. That's kind of when it was the thing. Tells us shock must have been extreme. He has a trembling hand. "I wish to see or hear no more of Dr. Jekyll," he said in an unsteady voice. "I'm quite done with that person. I beg you spare me any allusion to one whom I regard as dead." So clearly there is a correlation between the shock he has had and Dr. Jekyll, because they just become friends again, and now he's like bah, 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 bah. You got words like trembling, unsteady, and this shows us that there is a sense of fear, not just dislike about Jekyll, but a fear of him, which makes us ask some questions. And then I've written this in pink here, but I'll go over it. Words like "I am quite done with that person." This mirrors Jekyll's speech from the previous chapter, where he said, "I will never set eyes on him again, ... because I've cut a bit out. I am done with him." Now, as we hopefully remember, when Jekyll says this, he's talking about Hyde. And when Lanyon's saying about it, he's talking about Jekyll. Look at that mirroring. I'm done with that person. I am done with him. It's a very, very precise choice of wording. So we call this mirroring. And so this is another clue that Jekyll is Hyde and Hyde is Jekyll. I didn't want to highlight anything on that page. You guys are spared. Oh, and then Jekyll writes to Utterson, explaining that I can't see anyone. I don't want to see anyone. And he uses this phrasing here: "You must suffer me to go my own dark way." Now, it's a very kind of tenuous link I'm making here, but Jesus in the New Testament famously said, "Suffer little children to come unto me." And that's from the New Testament. I think it's been in other editions, but it's the main one it comes from. Now, when Jesus originally said that, suffer was another word for allow. Allow children to come to me, in death and things like that, and then they will find sort of eternal life in heaven, etc., etc. But this is kind of the opposite. This is almost an inversion, that Utterson must suffer him. And modern day connotations of suffer, it's the idea of sacrifice, pain. That Utterson must experience pain and allow Jekyll to go my own dark way. So it's an inversion almost of the Jesus speech, because Jesus is talking about going to heaven, but Jekyll is clearly talking about to come unto hell instead. And the fact that Utterson is the one who must suffer it, Utterson is selfless, in that his friends clearly know that he would be willing to do that and go through emotional trauma, seeing his friends go down this dark path. Jekyll then goes on to say, "I have brought on myself a punishment and a danger that I cannot name. If I am the chief of sinners, I am the chief of sufferers also." This idea of sinning and suffering is quite good, that they go hand in hand. So message to sin is to suffer even on earth. Everyone knows that if you sin, or you go to hell, that is where you will suffer. But clearly, Jekyll is having that suffering on earth. Sufferings and terrors so unmanning, so losing sense of masculinity, perhaps the Victorian gentleman. You might just want to highlight that. There's references to madness quite often. In something less than a fortnight, Lanyon was dead. Highlight that for the sake of highlighting it. It's just a plot point that it takes him 2 weeks to die. Last 2 pages. Again, another highlighting for the sake of highlighting. Just remember, on the day that he buries Lanyon and that's all dealt with, he gets that letter from him and he opens it, but it says on the front, "Not to be opened till the death or disappearance of Dr. Henry Jekyll." And this is a real credit to Utterson's personality. Professional honour and faith to his dead friend were stringent, meaning strict, obligations. Remember, obligation meaning something you have to do. And the packet slept in the inmost corner of his private safe. And I agree with what this student says here. This is the loyalty of Utterson. He makes it clear he wants nothing more than to look inside, but he has respect for Lanyon and respect for the dead, because he will not look at it, even though it will answer every single question he has. The doctor, it appeared now more than ever, confined himself to the cabinet over the laboratory. And if we think back to earlier, laboratory is kind of this symbol of science, not religion. And the fact that he's choosing to stay there now shows, again, this shift in his behaviour. He was out of spirits. He had grown very silent. He did not read. There was clear something was on his mind. Interesting. If only because I like to point out the importance of reading. So reading equals respectability. Perhaps it also equals sanity, because there's clearly something wrong about him not reading as well. And also emotional well-being. And that is why all of you should read as well. Not just Jekyll and Hyde, but literally anything. Please. That is it for chapter 6. Looking forward to chapter 7. Take care, everyone.